League actually is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. We were created by the Minnesota legislature in 1913, and up until the early 1970s, we were affiliated with the University of Minnesota. We have always, however, been a voluntary organization. Cities can elect to join or not participate. We have virtually 100% of the over 850 cities in Minnesota that are our members.
Well, the League's Community Conversations project is really part of our broader project called City Services and Funding. And it's, I think, really in the sort of the challenging economic and budget times we've all been living through in the last few years, it's really an opportunity and an effort to reach out and really communicate with citizens, both two ways, to inform them more about what cities do, and then the community conversations part that I think we're talking about today was an opportunity to really get inside the minds of citizens and just talk with them about their view of city services, what's important to them, how they see city services, and where they'd like to see cities going in the future.
The board authorized us to engage the Hubert Humphrey Institute at the University of Minnesota to do a research project, really, to look at local government finances. So they did two things. They looked at all of the information that was available from a number of sources about city expenditures and revenues over the last decade or so. They also interviewed a number of city officials to find out what they would do if this trend continued. And the result, the study was commissioned in June, I think, of 2010. And again, it concluded that if nothing changes, the situation for local governments, for cities in Minnesota, was going to be extremely dire and in a future that wasn't sustainable.
You know, one of the reasons why the Bush Foundation was interested in the City Services and Funding workshop process was that we have been seeing over the last couple of years that there has been a need for discussion about government redesign. And that doesn't mean, wholesale, let's toss it out and start over. It means that people need to come together and talk about what they care about, what the priorities are. And I think the workshops, have really done that quite well. And it once again illustrates that importance of community engagement.
Our government is as good or as bad as we make it. Government is the place where community comes together and decides who it is. And so if government isn't functioning the way that people want, becoming involved in one way or another is important. Voting is important. Phone calls are important. Participation in meetings when invited, paying some attention to that is very, very important. And it's hard with the demands of daily life for people to really get involved with their local governments.
Getting the input of those that we serve should be foundational to any change or any policies that we bring forward to implement change. Elected officials value the input of those that they serve, and they need it in order to move their city forward.
The idea was to go out to communities and talk to them about what city services they value and what funding mechanisms are possible, what services they want to fund, and find out what people actually value from the ground up all across the state of Minnesota.
We talked to people where they were already meeting. We didn't call a meeting and then say, please come to our meeting. We would go to Rotary clubs, we would go to church basement Sunday school classes, we would go to a lot of senior citizen clubs, some youth advisory commissions, places where people who were already together and were generous enough to give us a little time on their agenda. The community conversations were an effort to really put them in an environment where we gave them some good background information, explained to them what cities do. More importantly, or equally importantly, I think, how it gets paid for and how they are, to some extent, consumers of those city services, and then get their feedback and their thoughts about how they react to that, particularly Again, during tough economic and budget times when some challenging decisions have to be made, what's their view? What's important to them? What do they want us to do? What values do they think should drive that decision making by local elected officials?
That ground level data is something that we can use both to make decisions at the League of Minnesota cities about how we want to proceed with our own services, with our own focus, but more importantly, information that we can give to policymakers across the state, at the local level, at the state level, and even at the federal level, about what residents of Minnesota, when asked, care about most, and what they think should happen moving forward.
City officials, especially elected officials in these challenging times that we've been living through during the Great Recession, have been called upon to make some very, very difficult and painful decisions. And if you try to do that without citizen input, if you try to just say, well, here's what we're going to do to balance the budget, here's the services we're going to cut, here's the fees and the taxes we're going to increase, you kind of set yourself up for a failure because someone's not going to like that. If you take time to engage citizens and they feel like they're full-on partners in that decision making, I find that they'll give you some pretty thoughtful feedback that you can use. One, they'll understand more why decisions had to be made. And two, they'll be able to articulate for you what their priorities are, what they're willing to pay for, what services they might be willing to see cut back or live without if they had to.